right. Well, I am delighted to be joined by the Premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney. Jason, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for coming out to cover our convention, Candice.
Yeah, it was great. So last night you gave your speech, and I went to a session earlier in the day about your new Fair Deal program and plan. It seems like the members of this party have a lot of support for it. But my question is, what are you going to do if, at the end of the day, Ottawa has the last say? What are you going to do if they say no? What kind of leverage do you have against them? Have you thought about maybe putting some kind of a deadline saying, if we don't have our pipeline built by X date, we're going to do Y? Or what's the plan?
Well, yeah, it's all about building leverage. And let me just say, we Albertans are not looking for a special deal, but a fair deal. And we basically define that as being able to develop the resources that we have, get them to global markets so we can get a fair price, so that we can continue being by far the largest fiscal contributor to Canada. We contribute about $23 billion a year net, more that we pay in taxes to Ottawa than we get back in services and benefits. So there's a lot of ways to address that, but fundamentally we're trying to maximize our leverage. So here is an example. If the federal government doesn't guarantee or complete the construction for the Trans Mountain Pipeline and repeal what I call the No More Pipelines Law, Bill C-69, a new Environmental Assessment Act, we will hold a referendum on amending the Constitution, Section 36, which is the principle of equalization. That's one part of the $23 billion in net transfers that we make. Now, holding that referendum, I totally grant, doesn't actually change the Constitution or the equalization formula. But what it does is to create a very significant political fact. It elevates our fight for fairness to the top of the national agenda. Another example would be withdrawing from the CPP and creating our own Alberta pension plan. We would obviously take care of all beneficiaries in Alberta at the same benefit level. But we could reduce our premiums significantly, perhaps by a few $100s a year for Albertans, because we have the youngest population in the country, which means that we are major net contributors through the CPP. So Ottawa should be concerned about that. They should be concerned about Alberta withdrawing and losing a net $3 billion contribution to CPP. So those are just a couple of examples of how I think we can maximize leverage. And a third way is really forming alliances with other provinces. After this interview, I'm off to Toronto to meet with my colleagues, the other premiers. And I'm pleased to say that we've got very, very broad support for a number of our demands.
Well, right now, Alberta already has a significant political bloc. There's no MPs for the Liberal Party elected in either Alberta or Saskatchewan. So you could argue that there already is that political pressure. Why not consider a deadline saying, if the pipeline isn't built by January 1st, 2022, we're going to move forward. We're going to.
That's what I have a deadline. We will have a referendum on October 16th, 2021 on eliminating equalization if we're not very close to completion or have commissioned the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline. So we actually set a deadline on that. And sometimes I get frustration from some of our supporters saying, well, do this now. My response to them is, folks, we need to be strategic and not tactical. This is chess, not checkers. We need to think 3 or 4 moves ahead. We need to maximize our leverage. If we blow all of our ammunition now, we have no leverage to ensure the completion of a coastal pipeline. Look, our fight for fairness is about more than a coastal pipeline, but that is essential, essential to our economy. If we can get a coastal pipeline built, then suddenly the average price for Alberta oil goes from, we go to the global price from a $20 discount.
Okay, just changing gears a little bit. So before you were Premier of Alberta, before you came to Alberta to run for office, you were the Minister of Immigration. And you sort of single-handedly made that one of the most high-profile and important ministries in the government. You cracked down on illegal immigration. You brought in reforms for people coming and claiming asylum. Watching the last few years, 5 years, 4 years of Justin Trudeau sort of systematically dismantling a lot of your reforms must be frustrating. Canada is dealing with a surge of illegal immigration. Tens of thousands of folks are walking illegally across the border. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has just appointed a new immigration minister, Marco Mendicino. His background, he was a federal prosecutor. He helped put members of the Toronto 18 behind bars. So, he's a serious person that cares about national security. What advice do you have for him? What would you like to see him doing when it comes to dealing with this problem of illegal immigration in Canada?
Well, you're right. When I was Minister of Immigration for 5 years, my general approach was that Canada is and should be a welcoming country, that we need the talent and hard work of newcomers, but to maintain a generous immigration system and public support for it, you must show that it is a system with fair rules, without queue jumping, a system with integrity. And that's why I reformed the economic immigration programs to get folks with more relevant kinds of skills and to get them in here faster, to be honest with you, as skilled workers. But to crack down on the abuse of our generosity. You know, I'll never forget a lovely lady of Jamaican origin who approached me in Scarborough to say, I love your immigration policy, Mr. Kenney, because you're telling folks if they want to come here, get in the queue and wait to come through the front door, but you went and locked the back door and closed the side window through which people were sneaking into the country. And that's a pretty good metaphor. You know, Thomas Friedman, the New York Times liberal columnist, said that an ideal, and he said this long before Donald Trump, because this would not be an acceptable metaphor today. He said that the ideal immigration system has a wide gate, but a tall fence. In other words, there has to be integrity. And what concerns me, and I should avoid getting too much into this. I'm not the immigration critic in the federal opposition, but I'll just say that I think this is something that the current federal government does not really appreciate. When you see large-scale illegal border crossing, it undermines public confidence in legal immigration. And if you don't believe that, look at the, frankly, anti-immigration sentiment that has developed in the United States and in Europe in response to large-scale illegal migration. And on the particular point of the border crossings, Candice, we had some, when I was minister, we had some of those border crossings happening. They were much smaller scale. They were groups of 10 or 20 people every now and then walking across the border from Vermont into Quebec. We also, at the same time, had large vessels carrying smuggled migrants from South Asia to the west coast of Canada.
Very dangerously.
Very dangerously. And there were hundreds of passengers using dangerous old ships. And so we cracked down. We brought in a series of policies and laws to combat human smuggling, because tens of thousands of people die every year in human smuggling operations until the Liberal government in Australia stopped the boats, as they say, through similar provisions. Thousands of people every year were dying in marine migration smuggling operations off the north coast of Australia. So what we did was we brought in a new law to change the business model, to say that if you come through a designated smuggling event, you will not and you get asylum, you will not necessarily get permanent residency. You'll not be able to sponsor family members. You'll be put into immediate immigration detention on the presumption that you've come here illegally and for bad purposes, and you won't get the same access to all the benefits that regular, like say, government-assisted refugees get. And we did that not to be hard-hearted, but in fact, and this is something liberals have a hard time understanding, to be compassionate, because we didn't want people dying in the snow, walking across the border in the middle of the winter. We didn't want people dying in some rickety ship that they hired from a basically mob gang in South Asia through a human smuggling operation. We needed to reduce the value of coming to Canada so the smugglers could not make money off of those operations. It's about changing the smuggling model. We also worked with police services in that case in South Asia to help interrupt their operations. All of that was hugely effective, Candice. After we brought in those laws and those tactics, the smuggling basically went to zero, both across the U.S. border and from abroad through marine smuggling.
Well, we know that there are smuggling operations. I mean, I've been to the border myself, Jason, and I've talked to taxi drivers. There's all kinds of schemes happening to get people from New York Airport up to where they cross. And to your earlier point, there was just a report released through the Immigration Department finding that newcomers and new Canadians were the most irked by illegal immigration, because they feel it's undermining their stake in Canada.
Candice, as you know, I was Minister for Multiculturalism for 9 years, and I was Minister of Immigration and Citizenship for 5 of those years. So one of the things that kind of informed my perspective as immigration minister was my very deep contact with, my deep relationships with new Canadian communities. And overwhelmingly, that's where I heard the greatest distress about large-scale illegal migration. And I just told you the story about Ivy Johnson was a perfect example of that. But folks who wait patiently in the queue for years to come here are those who are most distressed to see people zipping around and queue jumping and then getting benefits to reward them effectively for doing so. And they're right to be distressed by it. Why am I talking? Because I am pro-immigration.
Right.
I welcome more newcomers, because I know that you're going to have some lefties watching this video and they'll call me names, like they call you names.
Don't worry about them.
But I welcome more newcomers to Canada as Minister of Immigration than any immigration minister in Canadian history. It doesn't stop people from accusing me of being somehow racist for welcoming more newcomers than any minister in history, increasing the number of resettled refugees that we brought to this country, bringing, by the way, 25,000 folks from persecuted minorities in the Middle East, for example. So anyway, here's the point. If you want to maintain strong public support for immigration, you cannot tolerate queue jumping and illegal migration.
Premier Kenney, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and to talk to our supporters and fans at True North Nation. I know everyone really appreciates hearing from you.
Thanks for coming out here to listen to what's going on in Alberta, Candice.